Hey everyone, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell because today we're diving into one of the most mysterious and hushed up chapters of history. We're not talking about generals or massive battles, but about ordinary people who, after the great victory, found themselves holding an ocean of death. What happened to millions of firearms? What was life like back home after the guns fell silent? And most importantly, is it true that even today, hidden in old walls and under floorboards, forgotten weapons from that terrible era still lie dormant? Stay tuned till the end. It's going to be creepy, fascinating, and very frank. And be sure to write your own family stories in the comments. Maybe your grandfathers also stashed something away. We really want to hear from you. A World Born from Fire. May 9th, 1945. This date is forever etched into the memory of millions. Victory. Fireworks, tears, laughter, hugging strangers. It seemed the very air trembled with happiness and incredible relief. The war was over. The most horrific, bloodiest war in human history. But behind that jubilation lay a harsh, devastated reality. A country lay in ruins. Cities had been wiped off the map. Millions were homeless. And against the backdrop of these giant problems, there was another, quieter, but no less dangerous one. A problem hidden in soldiers' duffel bags, in partisan dugout caches, in the attics of village houses. A problem named weapons. If, just before, having a huge number of weapons in the hands of civilians was normal and even necessary, the state itself armed the people to fight the occupiers. With the coming of peace, this wealth became a deadly burden. Overnight, the hero with a rifle defending his homeland could turn into a criminal possessing an illegal firearm. The situation did a complete 180. And it's almost impossible for us, people of the 21st century living in relatively safe times, to grasp the scale of this catastrophe. Armed children, school with a pistol in your belt. To understand the atmosphere of those days, I want to refer to a powerful piece of writing. I was recently in Kaliningrad, a city that was once the German city of Königsberg, and to feel the spirit of this unique place, I immersed myself in the work of local authors. The novel Dances in the Crematorium by Yuri Ivanov made the strongest impression on me. It's a tough but brilliant read. It has poignant lines describing the very moment the war ended. 13 to 15-year-old boys who just yesterday were sons of the regiment, messengers, or simply survivors of hell, suddenly had to become children again. They were supposed to go back to school desks. But how do you forget what you've been through? How do you unlearn the constant sense of danger? Ivanov writes a shocking detail. Every kid had some kind of weapon stashed away. A TT pistol, a German Walther, a lemon grenade. The war had become their natural habitat, and a gun was their guarantee of safety. So, picture this. Autumn of 1945, a regular lesson in a rural school. The teacher is explaining something at the blackboard when men from the NKVD, the precursor to the KGB, walk into the classroom and conduct a disarmament. They took pistols and ammunition from the children, and this happened week after week. It wasn't until the new year of 1946 that this widespread epidemic of armed children was largely brought under control. This is just one, the most touching and terrifying slice of the problem. But what about the adults? The veterans, the partisans, the inhabitants of occupied territories? They had orders of magnitude more weapons. The war's legacy, what attics and basements hide. I grew up in a city called Yilets. The Germans were there for a very short time, just about 10 days in December 1941. You'd think a fleeting occupation. But here's the amazing thing. Right up to the present day, when people start renovating old houses, fixing roofs, or digging in their gardens, every now and then they find traces of the war. A recent example. Just a couple of years ago, a friend of mine was helping his parents repair a leaky roof. On the dusty, old attic, among the junk, he found an object carefully wrapped in an oil-stained cloth, decayed by time. He unwrapped it, and there was a practically new German Walther pistol. Cold, heavy, sinister. History is silent on how it got there. Maybe a wounded German hit it? Or a Soviet soldier for whom the trophy pistol was a prized possession, but never dared to bring it home? My friend, to his credit, didn't hesitate and turned it into the police. And how many family legends are out there? In almost every other family where a grandfather or great-grandfather fought, there's a story about that one Luger that granddad brought back from the front, and a vigilant grandma, fearing drunken mishaps, hid it somewhere. And now the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren are scratching their heads. Where did Grandma put that coveted box? Maybe she bricked it up in the stove or under the floor in the shed. This weapon mythology has become part of our national folklore. Veterans returning home often try to bring a souvenir back with them, a pistol, a dagger, sometimes even a submachine gun. Doing this was incredibly difficult. Checkpoints at train stations and on roads were manned. Searches were conducted. But Russian ingenuity, multiplied by soldierly experience, worked wonders. Weapons were disassembled, hidden in pots of food, in bales of hay, passed on to railway workers. People who had been through hell wanted to have some kind of guarantee at home, a last argument in possible future troubles. They couldn't just unlearn the power that cold metal gave them. The price of metal and security. Now let's look at the problem from the States, the economic point of view. What was the country like in 1945? The economy had been on a war footing. Industry worked for the front. Millions of tons of metal went into producing tanks, guns, and shells. And then the war ended. A grand recovery began. Houses, factories, and roads needed to be built. And for that, metal was needed. A lot of metal. And so the state's gaze naturally fell on the vast amount of metal lying literally underfoot on the fields of past battles. Tanks, planes, artillery pieces, small arms. As early as February 1943, when the tide of the war had turned, special trophy brigades were created. Their task was to collect, account for, and dispose of enemy military property. The scale is staggering. During the war alone, these brigades collected 257,000 machine guns, 3 million rifles, and about 2 billion rifle cartridges. These are colossal amounts of metal. After the war, this work continued with redoubled force. The collected weapons were most often not stored. They were sent to be melted down. Scrap ferrous and non-ferrous metal was a strategic resource. German steel was used to make tractors, machine tools, and rails for the recovering railways. There was a terrible but rational symbolism in this. Instruments of death were being transformed into tools of life. The economic necessity of dealing with unaccounted-for weapons was colossal. Every surrendered firearm was not only a step toward public safety, but also a contribution to the restoration of the national economy. 3 fates of military steel, where the guns went. So, what ultimately happened to all the weapons that remained in the hands of the people? If we generalize thousands of stories, we can identify 3 main paths this dark legacy took: surrendered or seized. This was the most common scenario. The state understood that the problem couldn't be solved by fear alone. Therefore, an ultimatum was announced. The voluntary surrender of weapons would not lead to criminal prosecution. Sometimes a small reward was even given. But for illegal possession, there was a harsh sentence, from 3 to 8 years in a labor camp. The work of cleaning up the territories was systematic and went on for many years. Let me give you one telling example that will surprise many. We all remember the Moscow Olympics in 1980. Well, just before that grand event, from March 10th to May 25th, 1980, the KGB conducted a nationwide operation codenamed Arsenal. Its goal was the total seizure of unregistered weapons from the population. The results are staggering. A total of 6,905 firearms were seized, including 25 machine guns, 146 submachine guns, 1,676 rifles and carbines, 828 pistols and revolvers, 1,750 small-bore weapons, 2,480 sawn-off shotguns, and homemade rifle weapons. The most important part of the report is the note: the majority of these weapons have been stored by people since the war. Imagine, 35 years after the victory, machine guns were still lying in caches. This proves the problem was deep and long-lasting. There was also an urban legend, a kind of loophole. People said that to avoid trouble while carrying a weapon to the police station, you should write a note: "I, your name, am carrying this found pistol to surrender it to the police station. Date signature." And if you were stopped, you'd show this paper. A good story, but of course, it had no legal basis. The road to crime. The second path is the darkest. A huge number of weapons fell into the hands of the criminal world. We know a lot about the roaring 90s, but the roaring 40s and 50s were no less fierce. The country was full of brutalized people, deserters, former Nazi collaborators, criminals released under amnesties. They banded together into gangs that terrorized entire regions, and they armed themselves with war trophies. Here we can recall the famous Black Cat Gang, whose story formed the basis of the novel The Age of Mercy and the cult film The Meeting Place Cannot Be Changed, or the grim film The Cold Summer of '53, which depicts not just bandits, but former collaborators who continued their war against the Soviet state deep in the rear. The fate of these guns varied. Some were taken from bandits in shootouts and ended up in evidence rooms. Some were thrown away by the criminals themselves while on the run into rivers, swamps, and wells. And some were securely hidden in caches. And there is reason to believe that these very caches, made by mid-century gangsters, became a source of weapons for the new wave of crime in the 1990s. The circle was complete. Just in case, the eternal cache. The third path is the most mysterious and legend-filled. It's the path of weapons hidden for a rainy day or just to be safe. No one knows how many such hiding places exist all across the country. In my village, almost every household has its own story. Our grandfather buried a German carbine somewhere in the garden. Our great-grandfather hid a saber under the floor in the hallway. But the exact spot? Only he knew, and he took that secret with him. I had my own experience as a kid. Neighbors were doing a major renovation in the house of an old woman who had passed away and dragged all the junk, including an old mattress, to a vacant lot and burned it. We kids, like vultures, rummaged through the ashes. And among the coals, we found a charred but intact sawn-off Mosin rifle. It must have been sewn into that mattress. For years afterward, we played with that piece of iron, attaching a homemade stock made from a plank. Only now do I understand what a terrible thing we were holding. Then there's the story of the wandering Nagant. An acquaintance of mine from a village has a legend about a revolver that's been passed down through generations. It gets found every 5 to 10 years. A wife finds it in her veteran husband's trunk and, afraid, rehides it. Kids playing in the attic discover the stash. Then it gets lost again, only to reappear years later. This Nagant is over 80 years old, and it still moves from house to house, from cache to cache, like a ghost of the war that cannot find peace. Ghosts of a past war. A war doesn't end on the day the surrender is signed. It lives on for years in people's hearts, in their memories, in their actions, and in their hiding places. The vast amount of weapons that ended up in civilian hands became a kind of long-delay mine, the consequences of which were felt for decades. The state, by and large, coped with this titanic task. Systematic, methodical work bore fruit, but it was impossible to eradicate the problem completely. The scale of the tragedy was too great. Too much iron had been scattered across the land by the war. And today, almost 80 years later, the echo of that war can still be heard. A random find in a garden, a faded photograph of a grandfather with a trophy Luger on his belt, a family legend about a hidden rifle. These are all particles of that huge, untold story about what happened there, in the rear, after the salvos of victory had faded. So that's the story, folks. Eerie, truthful, and food for thought. What do you think about all this? Write in the comments if you have similar stories in your family. Maybe your relatives found something or, on the contrary, hid something. Let's compile this people's chronicle together. Your stories are the living history of a pivotal time. And be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you found this interesting. We have plenty more topics ahead that you won't read about in textbooks. See you next time.